to this place?
I think Republicans are part of a coalition that wants to turn Donald Trump out of office because he's the worst president in the history of the country. He's a profound threat to the security of the country, and we have absolutely zero chance. And by zero chance, I mean zero, Z-E-R-O, zero chance of moving past this with Donald Trump in that job. He is completely unfit for it. He is unfit mentally. He is unfit physically. He is unfit intellectually. He is a conspiracy theorist who has the blood of over 100,000 Americans on his hands because of the incompetence and the ineptitude in the response to the coronavirus. The leading math and science country in the world is the epicenter of this, and there's one reason, and that's presidential incompetence.
I also further presume you never could have dreamed that in your adult lifetime, the most effective ads against the Republican incumbent president would come from Republican political types like you.
Yeah, I would not, but I think these people are patriots. And I get so many of these ads on my cell phone. People just text them to me, you know, left and right. But these are important because they remind independents and weak Republicans exactly what's at stake here. So this is an important part of the coalition, and that's an important part of why the Cook Political Report is talking about a tsunami. You know, in 2018, we had a really good election, but we didn't do as well as we should have in Florida and Ohio. And what I'm seeing and what people are telling me is we're considerably ahead in Florida and ahead by a little bit, more than a little bit in Ohio. So there were a couple of structures left standing after the 2018 wave. They will come down in 2020. It will come down.
On that note, James has agreed to stay with us. We'll fit in a break here. When we come back, at some point in the next 118 days, between now and this election, it stands to reason we will see some presidential debates. We'll talk about the chances and the state of play with James when we come back. Welcome back. Tom Friedman of the New York Times says Biden should not debate the president unless he meets two conditions. First, Friedman says Biden should demand Trump release his tax returns from 2016 through 2018, for starters. Second, he says Biden should insist that a real-time fact-checking team approved by both candidates be hired by the Nonpartisan Commission on Presidential Debates, and that 10 minutes before the scheduled conclusion of the debate, this team report on any misleading statements, phony numbers, or outright lies either candidate had uttered. James Carville remains with us. James, no one is going to agree to that. Well, let's establish that. Right. I'll ask you this. Who needs debates more this season?
Look, Tom Friedman's a very nice guy. He writes very well about climate. I like to read his columns. I want to stay away from writing about politics. Of course, Biden wants to debate Trump. Trump is a doofus dope. All right? Biden debated Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, who's the most on-message politician I've seen in my life, Cory Booker, Amy Klobuchar. I saw him the debate before South Carolina. He did very well. He should debate him without condition anywhere that he wants to. Joe Biden will trounce Donald Trump in any debate. And what he needs to do is be sure to get a picture side by side so they can see how fit and how trim Vice President Biden is and what a slob that Trump is. No, Tom Friedman is dead wrong on this. And I'm sure that the Biden people are. They'll have him very well briefed. They'll have the debates. I don't think Trump will show up. I don't think Trump will get anywhere around a debate with Joe Biden. Joe Biden has debated some of the most articulate, bright, message-disciplined people I've ever seen in my life. So I'm sorry. I like you, Tom. You're a nice guy. That is a waste of ink.
Unambiguous, James. Let me ask you about second quarter fundraising. We're looking at some of the challengers of some of the truly vulnerable Republicans, And it's been a real open question how, as I asked somebody last night, how is Susan Collins going to run for re-election on Confederate statues and sports teams named Redskins and Indians? But some of these numbers that some of these challengers have raised for second quarter or Q2 in the business are off the charts. Do you believe the Senate is really within reach?
Well, first of all, to use a pun here for Senator Collins, it's a lost cause. Get over it. The Confederacy is gone. Of course, you're seeing these numbers, and you can see these kind of numbers everywhere. First of all, the question is not, is the Senate gone? The Senate is gone. The Democrats will control the Senate. The question that we're looking at, do we have 54 Democratic senators or do we have 58? And in order to have 58, if Trump stays in the race, which I still think is somewhat doubtful, then you got to have these debates because that'll get you there. And what I'm seeing now, Brian, is I look at 538 in Real Kill Politics, he's clocking in at 41%. That's it. And this is where this is going. I've been saying this for a long time. And we just got to keep the pressure on. These Trumpers are doing a great job. The Biden campaign's doing a great job.
With Mr. Biden, that they are increasingly willing to support the Democrat. Michael Steele, Steve Schmidt, Alexi McCammon, no three better people to have this conversation with. Steve Schmidt, start with you. Why are Republicans so on their game to try to make sure? Is it guilt? Is it our feeling that we were somehow complicit in bringing the party and the country to this place?
I think Republicans are part of a coalition that wants to turn Donald Trump out of office because he's the worst president in the history of the country. He's a profound threat to the security of the country, and we have absolutely zero chance. And by zero chance, I mean zero, Z-E-R-O, zero chance of moving past this with Donald Trump in that job. He is completely unfit for it. He is unfit mentally. He is unfit physically. He is unfit intellectually. He is a conspiracy theorist who has the blood of over 100,000 Americans on his hands because of the incompetence and the ineptitude in the response to the coronavirus. The leading math and science country in the world is the epicenter of this, and there's one reason, and that's presidential incompetence. Full stop. Secondly, when you look at the Russian bounties, when you look at his disloyalty and treachery towards the men and women that he's sworn to command as commander-in-chief, the men and women who come from every race and creed, every corner of the country, the American people should not tolerate this. He has assaulted our institutions. He has desecrated his office. He has assailed the constitutional order. He has weakened the checks and balances. He has been a force for illiberalism. We see the rescission of democracy all over the globe. We see his assaults on our allies and the weakening of the American position. And so 4 years in, we stand at a moment of abject American weakness and tragedy that can't end until he's gone. And that's why there's so many groups out there telling the truth on Donald Trump, trying to convince these Republican voters to say, you're fired.
Michael Steele, anything on your mind, but pick up this thread for me, too. I think on top of it, as Lindsey Graham once said, there is no more decent man than Joe Biden.
And that's the problem for Donald Trump. He ain't Hillary. And the way the country felt about Hillary Clinton is 180 degrees away from how they felt for how they feel for Joe Biden. They have concluded and are continuing to conclude, which is what is reflected in a lot of the polling. And as Steve and I will tell you, we're not, advocating national polling at this point because it's all over the map, and it's not the most reliable thing at times. But there is a trend line that's emerging in the behavior of the population of voters out there, as you just reflected and as Steve spoke to, about where voters are moving, where Republican voters are moving, that center left, center right independent voter who may have stood with Donald Trump in 2016 is firmly and beginning to strongly move away from him. So this now becomes a political problem for the president. which is why you have the Mount Rushmore moments, why you have the sort of dark, authoritarian speeches that he's been giving to bring that base back to him. But he's losing a lot of ground, and that's the difficulty he has to face because Joe Biden is not the opponent that he had 4 years ago.
Alexi, I'm confounded by the conduct of Trump and his allies because their mission is just what Michael Steele and Steve described, to reassemble their coalition, which was barely adequate for him to win in 16. But you don't to reassemble that coalition, you need pro-life women who care about judges. You need people who I don't even know where you find them at this point because the debasement of the office is in front of everybody's face. But you don't get the coalition back in place by attacking Tammy Duckworth, who Tucker Carlson and Donald Trump have been going after on Twitter and on Tucker Carlson's show for the last 2 days. You don't get them by standing in front of Mount Rushmore and calling peaceful protesters fascist. I mean, the language suggests that at least in some corner of his brain, even Trump knows it's a long shot this time.
I mean, Nicole, I feel like you and I have talked about this in the last few weeks alone, how President Trump's stance on some of these major issues really overtaking the country is increasingly at odds with how the public feels and how Americans at large feel. That's, to say with the protests, with the coronavirus and wearing masks, with everything that you just mentioned. And, we're seeing how this is affecting his reelection efforts. To your point, I think that the president is relying on an increasingly small base of, supporters who loved who he was in 2016 and continue to support him no matter what. But there are a lot of people who are viewing this, and I'm hearing this in focus groups, and we're seeing this in polling, similar to 2016 in that they kind of view this in a way as a choice between, some people say, the lesser of two evils, but they think that Joe Biden is the lesser of two evils, so to speak, not in the way that they saw Hillary Clinton in 2016. I think to Michael Steele's point, that can't be overstated enough. Joe Biden not being Hillary Clinton is a good thing for Joe Biden, and Donald Trump being who Donald Trump is has been a good thing for Joe Biden, who has otherwise been able to run a campaign in this weird new virtual reality exactly as he sees fit without being dragged into the campaign trail or dragged into these rhetorical arguments by President Trump. And I think that's what's really working for Biden and hurting President Trump. And we also see that, Nicole, in the way that President Trump is struggling to define Joe Biden. Crooked Hillary Clinton, corrupt Hillary Clinton was a really good way to label her because of the way that people had vilified her for decades. Joe Biden hasn't been a boogeyman of the right-wing machine for decades like Hillary Clinton has. So I think there are a lot of unique challenges inherent to who Joe Biden is as a person and as a candidate that Trump and his team are really struggling to figure out as they're facing an election in just a few months.
And I think the public has the ability to have two ideas in their head. I mean, he was one of the closest friends of Senator John McCain. Lindsey Graham spoke glowingly. I think that's one of Steve Lincoln Project's great ads about Lindsey Graham's compliments. And I think you're all right. I'm so glad to hear from all of you on all these topics. What an extraordinary time. Michael Steele, Steve Schmidt, Alexi McCammon, thank you all so much. Tomorrow will likely be a clarifying moment in the years-long quest to uncover Donald Trump's financial records. The U.S. Supreme Court is expected to deliver its ruling on whether the tax returns Trump has fought so hard to keep secret will be protected and shielded from Congress and a New York State prosecutor. The only major window into Trump's finances we've had so far came from a New York Times expose in October 2018, where reporters uncovered decades of tax dodging and fraud schemes. Mary Trump, Donald's niece, in her new book, talks about being the key source in that Times investigation. Writing this, quote, I hadn't fully grasped how much of a risk I was taking. If anybody in my family found out what I was doing, there would be repercussions. I knew how vindictive they were, but there was no way to gauge how serious the consequences might be. Anything would pale in comparison to what they'd already done. I finally felt as though I might be able to make a difference after all. I had to take Donald down. Joining us now, senior columnist for Bloomberg Opinion, Tim O'Brien. Tim, you've read the book. Tell us what you can.
I read it with great interest, Nicole, because I wasn't sure going in if the tone would be bitter, if her accounts wouldn't be credible, if there wouldn't be anything new in it. And really, curious about what the whole narrative would hinge upon. And what comes across deeply in this book is you have a very credible, measured, engaged narrator in Mary Trump. She's a trained clinical psychologist. She has a number of firsthand accounts of all of the dysfunction in the family, accounts that are new. I think specifically a lot of embroidery and really rich context about the hothouse emotional and psychological world Donald Trump grew up in, how it shaped him, and how it still informs who he is as president. A lot of her chronology isn't new, but the context and her perspective certainly are. And it really, I think, is a significant factor for all of us to understand just how troubled a man Donald Trump is and how completely unhinged he is psychologically and emotionally.
Jonathan Swan in the last hour used the word cruelty. He'd read the book as well and said what comes through is the cruelty of his father. And I made the point, and I'll put it to you as a question as well. I mean, I think cruelty is the policy through line that most of Donald Trump's critics see in policies like the Muslim ban, like caging children at the borders, like this science be damned, back to school, this inability to feel anyone else's pain.
Well, in fact, I think it begins with cruelty, Nicole, but what it ends up in is revenge. And I think that Trump's actions, a lot of his acting out is he feels aggrieved. And what's remarkable about this is someone who's born into an affluent family, physically healthy, had every advantage in the world. And he feels aggrieved nonetheless. And I think it's because he never felt he could live up to his father's expectations. There's a lot of people in the world who move past that because they're healthy adults. Donald Trump never moved past that. And I think the danger that we're in and the kind of wild threat he poses, frankly, is because he is emotionally and intellectually undisciplined, and he's incapable of having empathy toward anyone else suffering the consequences of his inability to leave the federal government, his complete lack of interest in policy, and this rampant juvenile delinquency that has informed his presidency from every day, from the first day he was in office.
And if cruelty is the yin, the yang is corruption, where does that come from?
Well, you know, there's always been a strong measure of grifter in the entire Trump family. You know, I think